product provided by Nintendo. Luigi's Mansion for Nintendo 3DS continues the recent trend of Nintendo porting over their classic console games over to the 3DS. We saw it with Xenoblade Chronicles, Captain Toad, Ocarina of Time, and now for the first time with a GameCube title, Luigi's Mansion. Using resources from Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, this new port takes the famous GameCube adventure on the go. With the new quality of life improvements to the gameplay and stereoscopic 3D, this is a fantastic trip back down the spooky memory lane. One day, Luigi is surprised to see that he's won a brand new mansion, despite not having entered a contest in the first place. Regardless, he decides to check out his new home and calls up his brother Mario to meet him in front of the mansion. Sadly, things quickly take a turn for the worse when Mario suddenly goes missing. Trying to find his brother, Luigi decides to enter his new mansion unaware of the ghostly, spoopy adventure that awaits him inside. He's not alone though. Early on we meet Professor Egad, a quirky scientist who's trying to research and stop the ghost inside. The dynamic duo works together to put a stop to these ghosts and find Mario. Luigi's Mansion was a darker turn for the Super Mario series that put Luigi at the forefront of his own adventure. At the time of its original release at the launch of the GameCube, it was the replacement for a new full-scale Mario game to launch the GameCube with. It ended up adding more depth to Luigi's character, forever locking him as the frightful brother that easily is spooked, but would obviously do anything to help out his brother. As a result, Luigi became a much more fleshed out character that wasn't just another Mario character or in the shadow of his brother. Ultimately, the 7-hour story provided a charming adventure that, although it doesn't live up to the leaps and bounds of something like Super Mario Galaxy, it still found its own ground to stand on. Being a remake of a game released in 2001, I would have loved to see some new story elements added onto this remake, or perhaps some cut content from the original now being replaced with this 3D version. Sadly, that's not the case here, but the original adventure is still as great as ever. Translating the experience from the GameCube to the 3DS, a lot of tweaks and additions had to be made to capture the experience of Luigi's Mansion now on the go. Some of it works out and others not so much. The biggest hurdle I could see in my time playing were the controls. Luigi's Mansion constantly focuses on using a shotgun-like approach to capture ghosts. You stun ghosts with your flashlight and then proceed to suck them up with your poltergust. It worked really well on the GameCube controller, but it can kinda be a bit cumbersome on the 3DS. If your 3DS doesn't have a C-stick for example, you'll be using the control pad, the circle pad, and a secondary button to switch between aiming, walking, and repositioning your aim. It works, but it really does take some time to get used to. Even with a newer 3DS, the C-stick isn't the best second analog stick, and aiming can still be a bit imprecise. The end result is something that works, but never really felt great, just adequate. There's an option to use the flashlight system from Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon that's a bit easier to control with the 3DS, but it isn't really how this game was meant to be played. Beyond the control changes, you'll notice that the Game Boy Horror feels much more intuitive this time around. It's constantly present at the bottom half of the 3DS, and using the gyroscope, you can quickly swap into a first-person perspective. It's nifty and it feels like a much more integral part of the adventure this time. Outside of these changes, Luigi's Mansion on 3DS still feels very much like the same game I played in 2001. You're exploring sections of the mansion to uncover boss fights that lead you on to the next section of the mansion. It's a pretty short game at about 6 to 7 hours and nothing near the caliber of something like Super Mario Sunshine or Galaxy. However, it still has an odd place in my heart for its unique gameplay, especially in the Super Mario universe. It's charming. You can even go through it with a friend this time in the new co-op mode. It's a cool trick, but not something that the game was really designed for, so it feels more like a novelty than a revolutionary new feature. You'll need 2 copies of the game to get it fully working, or use a limited version via the download play, but even then the framerate can still be a bit tough on the 3DS. Luigi's Mansion on 3DS uses a lot of resources from Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon to bring the GameCube experience onto the 3DS. Using the models from Dark Moon, there's a lot of remapping of animations from the GameCube version now using these new models. The end result is a much brighter but also refined looking game. Looking at both versions side by side, it's a bit of a disappointment to see the 3DS version have a much higher exposure. It hurts the dark spooky undertones that were meant to be omnipresent. On the GameCube, the dynamic lighting system was an impressive showcase of the tech at the time. It helped give the mansion more depth along with the already diorama-looking design. Of course, the resolution of the game and models will be a little bit lower because it's on the 3DS, but I didn't expect the atmosphere to change so much. Now I don't want to make it sound like the 3DS port looks terrible because it actually looks really nice. However, the difference is way beyond just resolutions and polygon counts. Textures are much better looking now, whether it's the walls of the mansion or the grass outside. Static images from the GameCube version are also now animated, just making the game feel much more interactive and prettier to look at. However, sometimes that new look can go a bit overboard, making a once weathered looking mansion feel like a brand new home. On the bright side, this new 3DS version actually features 3D support. For a while now, new 3DS games just sort of skipped out on 3D, but Luigi's Mansion breaks that trend. It feels similar to the experience of Dark Moon from that perspective, and that's great. It adds a lot of depth to the original mansion a lot of us explored as children. Stereoscopic 3D was actually one of the cut features of the GameCube version, so it's nice to see it finally be implemented years later. The only issue with it is that the added depth can sometimes overextend itself. It would mean that I could sometimes see the flashlight go past a wall that I wasn't supposed to see. As for performance, it ultimately varies on which model of the 3DS you have. On older hardware, you'll see a lot more frame rate dips that chug the most during boss fights. You'll still see a few dips even on the new 3DS models, but the spikes in them were much less frequent. Overall, the new visuals on this port look great, but can also sort of hurt the atmospheric tones that were ingrained in the original. Luigi's Mansion's music and sound design is nothing short of iconic. The ominous theme song that plays in the background feels like a boo is slowly stalking you throughout the mansion. It's menacing and sinister, adding character and atmosphere to the exploration of the mansion. Hearing Luigi nervously try to fill the silence of a room with his anxious humming only better helps sell the feeling of apprehension. With the press of a button, you can have Luigi fearfully scream out for Mario, expressing the little hope he has that his brother is just simply lost. Other neat touches include the subtle sound effects for minute actions, small things like Luigi's footsteps or just him slowly opening a door. They're subtle, yet have this presence of a loud slam in a mansion as quiet as Luigi's. Luigi's Mansion on 3DS captures the joy it was to explore the mansion back in 2001. The renovations to the gameplay and visuals are really hit or miss depending on the scenario. The newly added textures and 3D effect make the mansion more fun to explore. It feels like you're dipping your head into a dollhouse diorama anytime you play in 3D. However, those new effects also make the gameplay look brighter and less withered, sort of tarnishing that haunted feeling of the GameCube version. The controls can also be a bit difficult depending on which model of the 3DS you have. With that said, the experience still manages to translate over to the 3DS pretty well, adding on quality of life improvements with a more challenging post-game, a co-op mode, and built-in achievements. I still personally prefer the GameCube version over the 3DS, but the novelty of having it on the go with improvements in some categories could be an argument in favor of the 3DS version. Ultimately, Luigi's Mansion on 3DS may not be the best version of the game, but still a good one for a newcomer to the series or anyone just feeling nostalgic for the original. I give Luigi's Mansion on Nintendo 3DS a 7.5 out of 10. If you enjoyed my review, then be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with your friends. That helps more people find out about my videos, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and keep on gaming.